Good evening, and welcome to the 68th Annual Latke-Hamantash Debate at the University of Chicago. I'm Ethan Bueno de Mesquita. I'm a professor in the Harris School, and I have the great privilege of serving as your Master of Ceremonies this evening. Now, of course, all Latke-Hamantash debates are events of great moment, but tonight's is of particular import. For tonight, not only do we continue the profound intellectual and spiritual tradition of debating the merits of a decidedly second-tier potato dish and mediocre cookie, tonight we come together to not have PowerPoint. Seriously, we don't have PowerPoint. Hi, to honor a great man. Ted Cohen, professor of philosophy at the University of Chicago, passed away this year. Ted presided as moderator of this debate for decades. He did so with a humor and curmudgeonly spirit that were the very heart of these proceedings. When the great history of our people is written, God willing, the Latke-Hamantash debate won't be mentioned. But if it is, Ted's memory will stand us in good stead. We're honored that his daughter Shoshana is here tonight with us to help us honor his memory and pay tribute to his legacy and continue the great tradition that he did so much to shape and sustain. Shoshana, we hope that you'll forgive any of us who might give Ted a bit of a ribbing. In our defense, he would have expected nothing less of us. And I have to say, I stand here as your MC with a bit of trepidation. You see, long before I was a faculty member, I attended this debate as a student in the college. And that was some time ago. Long enough ago that in the college there was a thing called the core curriculum where students read the great books. I myself was made to read the Confessions of St. Augustine 3 times during my education here. I honestly don't know what they thought was wrong with me. Long enough ago that this university wouldn't have had dealings with unsavory regimes just because there might be money in it. Back then we did it because we believed in the ideas. And most importantly for explaining my trepidation, long enough ago that I remember the great debates presided over by Ted Cohen and Danny Leifer. You know, actually, when I was a debater back in 2009, Ted gave me a bit of a hard time for reminiscences such as these. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, that he wished that Professor Bueno de Mesquita would stop reminding us that he attended this debate as a college student because it made him feel old. Now, I have to say, with Ted having taken such extreme measures to have the last word on this matter, I'm inclined to concede the point. Oh, he would have loved it. Now, as you know, part of the MC's role is to provide some Jewish context to the debate. Often, following the tradition of Rabbi Leifer, this takes the form of absurd numerological explorations. Other times, following in the only slightly older tradition of Rabbi Akiba, it takes the form of absurd textual exegesis. I'm going to give a shot to both. So let's start with the numerology, known in the Jewish tradition as gematria. In gematria, each Hebrew letter is assigned a numerical value, and by playing with these numbers, we try and uncover hidden meanings and secrets inside texts or words. Now, I'm a simple Jew of no great learning, and so I'm going to take a simple approach. Okay, we're debating latkes and we're debating hamantaschen, so let's think about those words, which unfortunately are in Yiddish, but happily write letters. So start with the latkes. If we assign the gematria values, the lamed gets a 30, the aleph a 1, and so on, and we sum those values, we get the number 270. Now, I'm a busy person, and I don't have the time to figure out a Hebrew word that can correspond to 270. But if we sum up the 2, the 7, and the 0, we get 9. And this is a number we can work with. For the number 9 corresponds to the Hebrew word baz, or to despise. And so, it's plain as day that we're meant to despise the latke. Consider instead the hamantash. And again, assigning values to each of these letters, summing them, we find that haman, 745, tash, and 1100, putting those together, 1845. Now, in addition to being a busy person, I'm a political scientist, and we can't deal with numbers that big. But if you add those numbers together, you get 18, and now we're somewhere, right? Because as I can tell you know, the number 18 is an important number in the Jewish tradition. It corresponds to the word chai, or life. And life is, of course, among the most sacred of all Jewish values. Indeed, here in the book of Deuteronomy, not only does God tell us to choose life, he threatens our children if we don't. And so again, I think the gematria is clear. We are to choose the hamantaschen that we and our children may live. But now as I reflect on it, maybe we've been too hasty on the latke. Reconsider it with me just for a moment, okay? The latke, as we've seen, corresponds to the number 9, to despise. But we've made an elementary mistake, because as anyone knows, no one can eat just one latke. And multiplying them, we see the latke, too, corresponds to 18, or life. And so, as usual, the gematria leaves us with few answers, if any, regarding the superiority of the latke or the hamantash. But we do learn this. Both the latke and the hamantash mean life, which is to say that the debate over the latke and the hamantash is the debate over the meaning of life. Now, the meaning of life is the most deep and perplexing of all questions. It's no surprise we've spent 67 going on 68 years talking about it. Yet, as one of the world's great religions, it would be disappointing if Judaism simply left us perplexed, offering us no guidance. Happily, the great medieval Jewish thinker and philosopher Moses Maimonides offers us indeed a guide to the perplexed, a great work of theology and philosophy. Now, at the very outset of the guide, Maimonides makes clear that it is in fact his primary goal to clear up this matter of the latke versus the hamantash. He writes, "I do not say that this treatise will remove all difficulties for those who understand it. I do, however, say that it will remove most of the difficulties, and those of the greatest moment. And what difficulty, I ask you, could be of greater moment than the latke versus the hamantash?" Now, Maimonides argues that real answers require an esoteric understanding of Jewish text, and so the guide is addressed primarily to a particularly learned reader, capable of understanding deep secrets. Maimonides refers to these esoteric thinkers as, quote, the perfect. And who are these? Well, what does he say? Know that whenever one of the perfect wishes to mention, either orally or in writing, something that he understands of these secrets, he is unable to explain with complete clarity and coherence even the portion he has apprehended. Could anything make plainer that the guide is indeed about the Latke-Hamantash debate? Maimonides describes thinkers, both perfect and unable to explain their insights with clarity or coherence. To whom could he be referring other than the faculty of the University of Chicago? So does that mean that our debaters over these many years and here tonight, in fact, know the answer to our seemingly eternal question? The vulgar version being what's better, the latke or the hamantash? The esoteric version, of course, being what's the meaning of life? but simply lack the clarity or coherence to explain it to us? Not so fast, for Maimonides also says this: you should not think that these great secrets are fully and completely known to anyone among us. They are not. But sometimes truth flashes out to us, so that we think that it is day, and then matter and habit in their various forms conceal it, so that we find ourselves again in an obscure night, almost as we were at first. We are like someone in a very dark night, over whom lightning flashes time and time again. Latke-Hamantash debaters offer brief flashes of insight, but no ultimate answers, and so perhaps we will indeed never achieve complete enlightenment. But wait, Maimonides offers us one glimmer of hope in the very next sentence. Among us, wait for it, there is one, for whom the lightning flashes time and time again, so that he is always, as it were, in unceasing light. Thus night appears to him as day. Who is this one who dwells in unceasing light, peering through the dark night of the Latke and the Hamantash with the clarity of day? I see two hints. The first comes from Maimonides himself, who tells us, such a man being perfect in his religion and character, and having studied the sciences of the philosophers, and come to know what they signify, the meaning of which will reveal itself in due course. The second comes from the history of the Latke-Hamantash debate itself. Debaters come and go, offering, as Maimonides tells us, brief lightning flashes of insight. The one, by contrast, is a man perfect in his religion, who has studied the science of the philosophers, and who stands constant, illuminated over and over again by the lightning flashes of insight offered by the transient debaters. There can be, I submit to you, no question as to whom Maimonides refers. From among all of us, it was only Ted Cohen who stood in the unending daylight of full understanding of the Latke and the Hamantash, and that by virtue of having endured decades of lightning flashes of insight from his faculty colleagues as he presided over this debate over and over and over and over again. Now I know, even confronted by this irrefutable textual evidence, a few of you may remain skeptical that Ted is indeed the one. I bring you one final proof. Ludicrous numerological explanations have been a part of this debate for a very long time, and so they too must be lightning flashes of insight. And so it should lead us, through gematria, to the same conclusion we've reached through ridiculous textual exegesis. So I ask you to consider the name of the great sage himself, Ted Cohen, which, if we assign numerological values and sum them together, and sum them together again, and so you see, the Latke-Hamantash debate, Ted Cohen, and the meaning of life are all one great unified whole. The matter is clear. Judaism provides no answer to the question of the Latke versus the Hamantash, but of course it couldn't. The secret to full understanding, and so too to the meaning of life, lies in the unfolding history of the debate itself. It is a secret that is revealed only to one who, like Ted Cohen, perfect in their religion, learned in philosophy, and willing to endure decades of the lightning flashes of insight that come from this interminable debate. And so tonight, as we continue the great work and pay honor to Ted's memory, we have for you a particularly special debate, acknowledging the fundamental truth that for the good of humanity, the debate's work must go on. We have two new debaters with us to offer us two new flashes of insight from their areas of expertise, but also recognizing the great store of wisdom that has been lost with Ted's passing. We've chosen to look back, inviting four great debaters of the past to illuminate us with their lightning flashes one more time. We hope that you enjoy it. And now, before we launch into the debate itself, I'm happy to welcome Sam Maidman and Bill Karlitz from AE Pi to the stage.
Thank you, Professor. Shalom, or as we college students like to say, yo. My name is Sam Maidman, and I am the Vice President of the Lambda chapter of the Alpha Epsilon Pi fraternity.
And my name is Phil Karlitz, and I just like coming to these things. We've been told by the U of C higher-ups that we are here to represent the student body of UChicago. With this in mind, we have slotted ourselves about an hour to make our points tonight, and a full presentation outline can be found in your brochures. It makes sense that us fraternity brothers are up here representing the student body, since UChicago has always been known for its frattiness. In fact, these sweatshirts that we wear here are actually a tribute to Dean Davenport's favorite movie, Animal House.
All right, so let's get to what's important here and answer the question you all have. Why do these two bros have the mic? We are here tonight to invite each and every one of you, man or woman, Jew or Gentile, Nobelists, or I guess by UChicago standards, complete and utter failures, to what will be a typical U of C frat party. We will call it the reception. Let me tell you, this is gonna be a rager. There will be fine-looking Jewish men, traditional klezmer music, caffeinated beverages, and some dramatic Talmud reading. We're gonna party like my bubby told me to. This party is hyped to be even better than the Aims of Education address, although there might be a little less alcohol involved. Oh, and of course, there will also be latkes and hamentaschen, courtesy of BB's Kosher Deli.
But in all seriousness, we're actually here tonight to raise money for an important cause. If I can just let me get some information out here for you. Oh, yeah. The API Budweiser Fund was first established in 19...
I think what Phil meant to say is that each dollar raised tonight will go toward AEPI's Repair the World Fund. The Repair the World Fund helps to save lives, service veterans, and combat hate crimes by supporting a variety of fantastic Jewish charities, including Gift of Life, Innovation Africa, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and Heroes to Heroes. Following the debate, there will be a table set up just outside of Hutchinson Commons where we will be selling tickets for a minimum $5 donation to AEPI's Repair the World Fund. You can also donate online by visiting latke.uchicago.edu and then clicking the Support the Repair the World Fund button.
We'd like to thank all of the students on this year's debate committee, namely Lori Ossip, Miriam Beil, Rachel Scheinfeld, Matt Goldenberg, and Jonah Baskin for all their help. And a big shout out also to Naren Hazar Singh, our webmaster and co-organizer of last year's debate, for all of his technical wizardry. Lastly, we'd like to thank all of our student volunteers without whom this event could not be run, so thank you.
All right, Professor, let's get the show on the road.
Welcome to the 68th annual Latke-Hamantash debate at the University of Chicago. Or maybe it's the 69th, or it's the 67th. Ted would always point out the extreme difficulties in trying to set an exact number to the number of years that this debate has been going on at the University of Chicago. I can't and I won't. I do know that we've been debating this issue for a very long time here at the university, and we are very proud of this tradition. The debate itself goes back many centuries and a couple of millennia. And what we are doing tonight has been done ever since the Latke-Hamantash issue was first raised, and will continue to be done as long as the issue is not settled once and for all. At a time when so much academic inquiry is spent on esoteric and irrelevant matters, this debate focuses on the big questions. To set the tone, let me begin by giving a few of the greatest hits of the pre-Chicago analysis of Latke versus Hamantash. There is nothing explicit about this topic in the Talmud. As is well known, the Mishnah and the Talmud had an ambivalent relationship to the Hasmonean dynasty founded by Judah Maccabee. The latke is therefore not discussed at all. The closest thing is that there is a general exhortation that on each night of Hanukkah, one should ingest enough oil to burn for 8 days. The earliest debate on record is the well-known lost Platonic dialogue. When Socrates asserted that nothing is better than a latke, Plato responded, a hamantash is better than nothing. A fortiori, oddly breaking into Latin, a hamantash is better than a latke. Socrates then, with remarkable flexibility and without conceding defeat, insisted that indeed, though a latke is better than nothing, nothing is better than a latke. This has led to a large Straussian commentary on Socrates as a mystic, but I don't think I need to go into those details here at the University of Chicago. Jumping to the Middle Age scholars, we have the celebrated and puzzling ontological proof of the superiority of the latke. I shall review. Define the latke as the most superior food that can be imagined, and then consider its properties. First of all, it must exist. For non-existent food is worse than nothing. It doesn't fill you, and you still have to tip the waiter. Secondly, the most superior food must be a comfort food par excellence. And finally, and this is an important point, it must have a perfect shape. And throughout history, the circle has been viewed as the most perfect shape. It optimizes the isoperimetric constant of perimeter squared divided by area, which in the case of latke is 4 pi, twice as good as 2 pies. Later debaters have suggested that this ideal food should actually be spherical rather than circular, and have identified the philosophical latke with the practical matzo ball. The early 20th century has brought about a major turnaround in the idea of this debate. Rather than discuss the metaphysical, legal, physical, or moral issues of superiority, Freud raised the question of the importance of the latke and hamantash in their human context. For Freud, the edible triangle was a hamantash. Prune in particular fired up his extraordinary vivid imagination, but poppy seed, well, let me not go there. The reevaluation of Freudian ideas within the discipline of psychology led to a reconsideration of its implications for the Latke-Hamantash debate in the early years of our university's debate on these matters. As time has gone on, we have had the cerebral, typically Chicagoan pleasure of hearing many scholars from different disciplines shed new and suggest strange insights on this problem. The one person who can surely be blamed for all this is Ted Cohn, a very distinguished philosopher and joker and baseball enthusiast. Ted was a wise and gentle man. He had his own view regarding the outcome of this debate. Let me quote from his article, Consolations of the Latke. The hamantash is a very, very good thing of its kind. The latke, however, is a perfect thing. And a world without hamantashen would be a wretched world. A world without hamantashen might be unbearable, but a world without latkes is unthinkable. For Ted, to love the latke is not to hate the hamantash. He was a real mensch. He was also a fair and impartial moderator of this debate and loved our discussions. For the ideal of scholarly debate really meant something to Ted. Let me quote from his opus, Jokes, published by University of Chicago Press. A young man applies to study with a Talmudic scholar. By the way, Ted did tell long jokes, so sorry for this one. The scholar rejects him, saying, "Before you can study Talmud, you must know Jewish logic." "But I already know logic," protests the student. "Aristotelian syllogisms, truth-functional logic, predicate logic, set theory, everything." "That's not Jewish logic," replies the scholar. But the student persists, and so the scholar offers to give him a test to determine whether he's prepared. "Here is a question," says the scholar. "Two men go down a chimney. One has a dirty face, one has a clean face. Which one washes?" "That's easy," says the student. "The one with the dirty face." "Wrong," says the scholar. The one with the clean face looks at the other one, sees a dirty face, and thinks his must also be dirty, and so the one with the clean face washes. I see, says the student. It's a little more complicated than I thought, but I can do this. Please test me again. All right, says the scholar. Here is a question. Two men go down a chimney. One has a dirty face, one has a clean face. Which one washes? In surprise, the student answers, just as you said, the one with the clean face washes. Wrong, says the scholar. The one with the dirty face observes his companion looking at him and making ready to wash his face. Aha, he thinks. He must see a dirty face, and it's mine, and so the one with the dirty face washes. Ah, it is even more complicated than I yet realized, says the student. But now I do understand. Please test me once more. Just once more, says the scholar. Here is the question. Two men go down a chimney. One has a dirty face, one has a clean face. Which one washes? Now I know the answer, says the student. The one with the dirty face washes, just as I thought in the beginning, but for a different reason. Wrong, says the scholar. If two men go down a chimney, how can only one have a dirty face? Go and study. When you know Jewish logic, come back. It is the essence of this tradition, says Ted, that these debates, these arguments, let us call it this study, goes on and on. Of course, resolutions are found, consensus develops, and not everyone's opinion is of equal weight. But there is no systematic finality. In other words, it was not pure corruption that has resulted in this debate going on and on for so many years. Sure, Ted really liked being the center of attention and getting to introduce Nobel Prize winners and poets and presidents. Okay, university presidents, but still not bad. No, he really believed in the debate. And as a philosopher, he was used to guys like Plato and Socrates and so on, still being read after millennia, and he saw nothing wrong in a never-ending, continuing debate of the ages. On the other hand, I am proud to represent the mathematics department. And it seems that in choosing me, I'm not too humble to admit this, the committee, and you know committees, has given me a mandate to make a change. Okay, I was the first person to say yes, but I'll still call it a mandate. When we mathematicians prove something, it stays proved, most of the time, at least for a while. So I hope to be able to announce at the end of tonight's debate that the issue is finally settled and that you were at the historic last debate. It is my honor and responsibility to introduce the esteemed debaters in this symposium. I write the bios of all scholars who do not write their own. Who writes mine? Bertrand Russell? Okay. Jeff Harvey is a theoretical physicist at the University of Chicago. Jeff must be happy to be a theoretical physicist because the life of a practical physicist is not a happy one. Ever since Heisenberg, they are doomed to not find the position when they have the momentum and not to get the momentum when they have the position. Jeff works primarily on topics in particle physics and string theory, but does cosmology and pure mathematics to pick up a few extra bucks on the weekend. Much of his work involves particles that are so small that they don't even exist. These particles, called Harveyons, have remarkable properties. They are the very best particles that one can possibly imagine. Thus, Harvey's work has given an empirical disproof of the ontological proof of the existence of God, at least in theory. He, as part of the famous Princeton string quartet, discovered the heterotic string. The homoerotic string still has not been found, and I, for one, am shocked at this state of affairs. In partial penance for this failure, Jeff trained a conference of physicists. That's something like a murder of crows, only whiter, to dance the Malsadena. On the other hand, he cheated on them and danced the Macarena with Bristol Palin during a break at that very conference. When confronted by his colleagues about his cheating, our string theorist quickly pointed out, "I can explain everything." Last year, Jeff was elected to the National Academy of Sciences. Besides being a very great honor, this is a membership that has responsibilities. If you are not familiar with this, the Act of Incorporation, signed by President Lincoln on March 3rd, 1863, created the National Academy of Sciences to benefit society by advising Congress and the nation on the most important scientific problems of the day, especially deciding who will be members of the National Academy of Sciences. Jeff's most recent work mocks modular forms, and I beg him to please maintain decorum during his remarks at this debate. Jeff.
I was afraid that I was going to have to get you all up dancing. Thank you for that introduction. It's a great honor to be here tonight, but I must confess to a fundamental confusion. I'm not an expert on the latke or the hamantash. I am not Jewish, and I'm not particularly funny. So I don't know what I'm doing here. But after some thought, an idea came to me. It must be that, in fact, the organizers want to hear about my latest research in superstring theory. And so, in fact, this is what I'm prepared to tell you about. Now, this is just the material that I asked you to look at in preparation for what comes next. And I particularly would like you to note something that to me came as a great surprise. In the middle of my computations, I encountered, yes, a latke and a hamantash. And I did not know what they were doing there. And in fact, I was so confused that I decided that I should consult with one of the world's most eminent string theorists and try to find out what the latke and the hamantash were doing in the middle of my equations of string theory. This is Sheldon Cooper from the Big Bang Theory, for those of you who are not fans. And Sheldon, unfortunately, was not familiar with the latke or the hamantash, coming from rural Texas. In fact, I don't think he'd actually ever met a Jew. But he assured me that whatever they were things, and that string theory was a theory of everything, and therefore it must also be a theory of the latke and the hamantash. Now, I did not get the answer that I wanted from him, but in a twist of fate, Fabiola Gianotti, the new Director General of CERN, happened to be visiting the University of Chicago. And she was complaining to me that after the discovery of the Higgs boson, physicists at the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, Switzerland, were essentially sitting around without anything to do. So I had an idea, really, I think a brilliant idea that only a string theorist could have. I suggested to her that instead of accelerating protons and electrons, she should accelerate prune hamantash to an energy of 7 million billion electron volts. Well, Fabiola agreed immediately. She returned to CERN with a plate of prune hamantash, and she was later kind enough to send me a video feed of the data that she took. So here you see the Atlas detector. This thing is several floors tall. It was partially designed and constructed at the University of Chicago. And I am now going to show you a movie of what happens when you collide hamantash at a center of mass energy of 7 TeV. Now, this, of course, happens in the blink of an eye in real life. A triumph for art, but a disaster for physics. I'm told that the discovery of supersymmetric particles has been set back by 20 years. But undaunted, I set out to nonetheless understand the origins of the latkes and the hamantash in my superstring equations. I decided to use more precise methods, And to explain to you the results that I found, I first need to remind you of some of the very simple facts of the structure of matter. So as you see here, matter is composed of atoms. Atoms are composed of electrons surrounding a nucleus made of protons and neutrons. And the protons and neutrons are further made up out of particles called quarks that are bound together through their interaction with other particles called gluons. Quarks come in 3 colors and 6 flavors: up, down, strange, charm, bottom, and top. And I swear to you that everything on this slide is true. Furthermore, not only the proton and the neutron in the center of the nucleus, but many, many other elementary particles that are produced in accelerators can be viewed as bound states of these quarks. I've illustrated this here for a few sets of particles. All right, so now let us turn to the experimental part of this talk. You may think, what does superstring theorists know about experiment? But it turns out quite a lot. So here's a picture of the apparatus. This required huge amounts of data, and I will confess that since I planned on eating the data after producing it, these were actually made with Nutella rather than with prunes. Now, having produced the Hamantash, I viewed them with a high-powered electron microscope and found the first evidence of the micro-Hamantash. It's rather dark from up here, but I hope you can see that. And what do we see here? Well, any fool can see that this idea that protons are made out of bound states of 3 quarks is really another way of saying that they consist of the micro-Hamantash. The gluons are simply bits of pastry. The 3 colors of quarks, which are inseparable, is simply the fact that the micro-Hamantash has to have 3 corners. Now, this is not the only evidence that I have. I did further studies. So, for example, here's one sample that came fresh out of the oven, and a comparison with the quark model predictions. Another run led to this configuration of Hamantash. And again, we see perfect agreement with the quark model predictions. Now, you might think that I'm in fact arguing for the superiority of the Hamantash, since it can be viewed as one of the fundamental constituents of matter. But it turns out that unlike Schrödinger's poor cat, that can exist in a state that is half alive and half dead, the Hamantash is not really compatible with quantum gravity. There is no state that combines a baked Hamantash and an unbaked Hamantash. There may be half-baked arguments, but there are no half-baked Hamantash. So to understand quantum gravity, we have to go beyond the Hamantash and consider the Latke. And in order to do that, we also have to understand string theory. So I want to go back to that original slide, but I won't. Let me try a different way of presenting string theory to you. So there are a variety of types of strings. Open strings can join together through their interactions to make closed strings. There is the bosonic string, and then 2 of my favorites, one of which was alluded to earlier, the heterotic string, and the one that is the internet's favorite, the catarotic string. Now, let us try to test string theory experimentally. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not quite done with string theory here. So I've also decided to discuss some of the applications. So here is an illustration of the proper use of string theory. You don't need to be daunted by the fancy mathematics. You can simply have fun with it, not concern yourself with the equations. But you must be careful. Here's an example of the improper use of string theory. All right, let's move on to the experimental results, because the experimental support for string theory is much stronger than many people suppose. You may have read in the popular press about the demise of string theory, about string theory skeptics, but none of it is true. Using only these simple ingredients, one can easily find evidence for the string theoretic nature of reality. So here is one of the first runs that I did. And while you can see evidence of stringy behavior here, to really understand the string theory nature of the latke, one has to do very high resolution experiments with very fast time resolution. And when you do that, indeed, you find evidence for open strings coming together and resplitting. And once you know that open strings can interact like this, there must exist closed string configurations. And after much, much work, I managed to detect one of these closed string configurations. Now, given the existence of closed strings, an idea comes to mind. There's the conventional open string latke, but why not make a latke purely out of closed strings? And in fact, here it is. Forget the cronut, this is going to be the next big thing. And after much, much hard work, I was actually able to discover the heterotic latke, the heterotic latke. Now you may say, what is erotic about this picture? These are a picture of heart-shaped latkes. And we are cooking with schmaltz. So in that sense, the heart is erotic. And if you want afterwards, I've got some other pretty explicit pictures of latke I could show you. My wife wouldn't let me show them to you, though. Now, I think I've shown you strong evidence that the latke is nothing more or less than the tasty manifestation of the underlying superstring nature of reality. What then of the Hamantash? Does it not also manifest the stringy nature of reality? How can we reconcile these two points of view? The key is to use duality. Duality is fundamental in string theory, it's fundamental in physics, it's fundamental in the arts. We have the duality of particle and wave, the duality of electric and magnetic fields, the duality of yin and yang, of mind and body, and of foreground and background. And I illustrate this here by putting up a series of blobs, which you might want to view as the world sheets of strings as they evolve in space and time. And as long as you focus on those dark blobs, you focus on the foreground, the message is not clear. But if I force you to focus on the background, then you see that the underlying message is indeed that we must apply duality to understand the consistency of the latke and Hamantash points of view. Now, unfortunately, I don't have time to explain or to derive the full consequences and application of duality to this topic, but I can just say that there is a generalization of Juan Maldasena's ADS-CFT duality, the same duality that physicists were dancing to not long ago, and it implies, well, I don't know why it did that. Anyway, it implies that any description of nature that you can obtain with n Hamantash, in the limit that n goes to infinity, can equally well be described by a theory of latkes in curved space-time. You may be skeptical, as many people were skeptical of Juan Maldasena's original duality, but you will have the chance to test this idea experimentally following tonight's debate, and I encourage you to do so. Thank you very much.
Diane Herrmann has been the face of the mathematics department to countless undergraduates for the past 30 years. She brings mathematical precision to the running of our program. Our policies under Diane are axioms, and their implementations are theorems. And as you know, a true theorem admits of no exceptions. Diane is known to observe that 0 is a number 2. Regarding the rescheduling of exams, departmental policy, following the late Paul Sally, has always been, only if you have a funeral that day, and it's your funeral. Diane insists that, in addition, this exemption need be applied for well in advance. Diane's two most powerful proof techniques are reductio ad absurdum, you've got to be kidding, and proof by contradiction, I dare you, I just dare you. Seriously for a moment, and I will abuse my position to be serious for a moment, Diane is retiring this year, and my department and this university are in real trouble. Diane received her PhD here under the direction of George Glauberman, who has debated here twice, and she has been here since. She holds Level 2 certification from the National Academy of Needle Arts, and her piece, Walking the Water's Edge, a design based on the wave equation, has been featured in the American Math Society's calendar. She has given lectures on lecturing and has won the Quantrell Prize. So I am sure that whatever else we can say about Diane's presentation tonight, mostly everybody will understand it. And that will be checked because Diane is giving an exam during the reception. Diane.
So, to come to this question, but first, I was here a couple of months ago with many of you in this room, and the PowerPoint didn't work, and the microphone didn't work, and the projector didn't work. So, does anybody have any questions from that session? Okay then. What I'm going to address tonight is whether either of these foods is appropriate for working with the Common Core state standards and the Common Core state standards for mathematical practice. This is an important development in our country, and I think it's important that we address the Latke-Hamantash question in that regard. So I want to talk about theory versus practice. Now, we have that t-shirt here that says it's all good in practice, but what good is it in theory? Forget it. Doing mathematics without practice is kind of like going to an aerobics class and auditing it. So one of my forebears, Zalman Yusiskin, had a lot of dichotomies about mathematics and mathematics education, and one of the ones he was particularly enamored of was this pure versus applied. And tonight we're going to come down on the side of applied mathematics because clearly the U of C is going in the direction of practice, considering the new computational applied math major and it's molecular engineering, but it's still, they're going to wear engineering t-shirts. So let's talk about these Common Core state standards. What are they? I want to get the list of states where you don't have to pay attention to my talk from now on because your state doesn't participate in these. So if you are from Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Indiana, Virginia, Alaska, or Minnesota, the rest of the talk doesn't apply. Now, building on the best of existing state standards, these Common Core standards are going to give us learning goals. And what are those learning goals for? Of course, we're worried about college here. Maybe not so much, but some of you who are economics majors, career. The rest of you, life. And including the preparation of Jewish holiday foods. And that emphasis is mine. Now, the standards of mathematical practice are very important, and as Professor Weinberger has said, there will be a quiz. So here they are. ccss.math.practice.mp1. Make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. ccss.math.practice.mp2. Reason abstractly and quantitatively. CCSS, there's 8 of these, just be patient. CCSS Math Practice MP3, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. CCSS Math.Practice.MP4, model with mathematics. This will figure heavily. Make sure you remember the number 4. CCSS.Math.Practice.MP5, use appropriate tools strategically. Keeps going. CCSS.Math.Practice.MP6, attend to precision. CCSS.Math.Practice.MP7, look for and make use of structure. CCSS.Math.Practice.MP8, look for and express regularity in repeated reasoning. Do you remember number 4? Remember number 4, it's important. Now, what do these Common Core state standards focus on? They work on procedural fluency, so this is all about skill. Productive disposition, never say mathematics educators don't have their own vocabulary. This is the habitual inclination to see mathematics as sensible, useful, and worthwhile, coupled with a belief in diligence and one's own efficacy. And the other thing that they clearly focus on, at least as far as this talk goes, is culinary creation, that is, Latke-Hamantash. Now, which is best to align with the Common Core state standards? I'm going to make an argument here. Which one works better in the making? Not the eating. If you've eaten here, the food, it's how you make them. That's what's important. So we're looking for mathematical tasks of sufficient richness to show that procedural fluency. And we're going to start with elementary school, continue through high school and college to graduate level, and consider these Common Core state standards in mathematics as we teach our students to create these foods. So let's begin with kindergarten. Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't know how to handle the creation of holiday foods with kindergartners, so I found a worksheet. And here is the content standard that I wanted to examine. So this is ccset.math.content.k.g.b.5. Model shapes in the world by building shapes from components, e.g. sticks and clay balls, and drawing shapes. So let's think about what would you do with a kindergartner to make a latke. Here are instructions from that holiday worksheet. Here's how to make the latke. Glue together 2 paper plates and cut them out in the shape of a latke. Remember, they don't have to be perfect circles. That emphasis is not mine. That was on the worksheet. Now, what about making hamentaschen with kindergartners? First, you make a round disc out of Play-Doh and add a checker in the middle for filling. There you go. Now, that's not quite a hamentaschen, but you just have to fold. And there it is. So now, we were working with, what standard were we working with? K.G.B.5. Which of the two do you think works better for supporting and aligning with that standard? Clearly, the kindergartner doing mathematics while making hamentaschen will experience MP4, MP5, MP6, and MP7 while practicing K.G.B.5. Whereas in contrast, a kindergartner doing mathematics while making latke would only experience at best MP4 and MP5 while practicing K.G.B.5. So let's move on to high school. We're skipping over a step, but that's okay. CCSS.math.content.h.sg.co.d.12, and this does not refer to 12th grade. Make formal geometric constructions with a variety of tools and methods, compass and straight edge, string, reflective devices, paper folding, dynamic geometry software, etc. Okay, this is all about MP5. Do you remember what MP5 is? Using tools strategically. Come on, get with it. All right, so there is the obvious. What tool do we use in mathematics to create a simple model of the latke? The compass, of course. But you realize this poses difficulty. Why? The latke need not be a circle. So despite your procedural fluency with the compass, if you're a high school student, you might be subject to misconceptions about geometry and circles. There's the pi, is it 3, is it how big, I don't know what. And then here are these these are not circles. These are really not circles. Hamantaschen, however, are built up from real circles and triangles. Let me cite one of the forebears in the faith. This is from Euclid's Elements, Book 1, Proposition 1, and it's not very far if you're fluent with this procedure. Take a look. You got to use a compass and a straight edge, tools, MP5, remember? To this. So you start with the circle, you make the folds, voila. A circle and an equilateral triangle. All right, let me move on. CCSS solid geometry, a topic which my mother had a whole year of school in, but I'm guessing in this room, not so many of you. CCSS.math.content.hsg.gmb.b.4. Identify the shapes of two-dimensional cross-sections of three-dimensional objects and identify three-dimensional objects generated by rotations of one-dimensional objects. Now, the Hamantaschen can be considered as three-dimensional objects. I need tools here. Do you know what this is? It's not a circle. That's a tetrahedron. Speaking precisely, each Hamantaschen is a tetrahedral frustum. Here's a model, clearly made out of grape Play-Doh and blueberry filling. It's a tetrahedral frustum. And did we say paper folding? Let me show you how to make a tetrahedral frustum by folding paper. This is courtesy of the mathematics department at Shenfield High School in Essex, where their goal is to equip and enable and challenge and inspire their mathematics students. Note the precision. That's MP what? This is allowing some motions that aren't strictly allowed by Euclid by moving a point to a point. What I see here is MP4, modeling with mathematics, the MP6, use of precision, MP7, use of structure, look at all those triangles, and MP8, regularity in repeated reasoning. We're almost through here. Equilateral triangles. Now, this model was made on A4 paper, but don't let that worry you. You can make A4 paper on your own in the United States. You just have to use the metric system. We're almost done. You're going to see it. It's magic. Can you stand it? It's so exciting. Almost. Almost. But there's more. Continuing with the HSG CCSS, here is CCSS math.content hsg.srt.a.2. And this one's all about similarity. I won't read this. This is about triangles and similarity. You all know what that is. Now, I want to talk about self-similar Sierpinski models. This is the kind of model you make by starting with an equilateral triangle and removing the middle fourth, replacing the middle fourth with each of those, and continuing ad infinitum. Now, this is a Sierpinski triangle here. I actually have a Sierpinski pyramid. Pretty cool, huh? Here is a Sierpinski Hamantaschen. Seattle local food blogger Debs Gardner made this in 2011. She said the world was not complete without what she called a Sierpinski-taschen. And she says it's tessalicious. Now, there is still the CCSS HSG modeling standard, CCSS.math.content. I'm getting tired, HSG MG to A.1. use geometric shapes, their measures, and their properties to describe objects. Now, I have colleagues who are in the education profession. One of my colleagues, Elise Gittleman, master's degree here from 77, teacher and math coach at Newton North High School in Newton, Massachusetts, said, consider poppy seed filling. You didn't want to go there, I'm going there. Poppy seeds are symbolic of either the many lots cast by Haman and the promise of God made to Abraham to spread his seed throughout the world. Have you ever dropped poppy seeds on the floor? They go all over the place. Elise observes, poppy seeds modeling the spread of Abraham's seed throughout the world. Why, that's a standard of mathematical practice. And which one is it, gang? It's MP4. Now, what about Common Core state standards for higher mathematical education, such as we have here? Are there even standards? I mean, aside from those from the US News and World Report ranking. There are some professors of physics who would try to use their disciplinary expertise to characterize and simplify the Latke's representation. And I love this title. I am not making this up. I looked in the Journal of Mathematical Physics and found this paper. Orbifold singularities, Lie algebras of the third kind, Latke's, and pure Yang mills with matter by Tamar Friedman. Here is her abstract. We discover the unique simple Lie algebra of the third kind, or Latke, that stems from codimension 6 orbifold singularities and gives rise to a kind of Yang-Mills theory which simultaneously is pure and contains matter. The root space of the Latke is one-dimensional, and its Dinkin diagram consists of one point. I know you had it on your first slide. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it was up there. It's just... So these people are still suggesting the misleading model of the Latke as a circle. In fact, in this paper, she gives a diagram and shows a blow-up of the C3 mod Z3 Dinkin diagram of the Latke. Now, Dinkin diagrams can be quite complex, but this is the Dinkin diagram for the Latke. But, you know, even kindergarten students know it's not a circle. It's not a circle. So let me conclude here. Circles versus triangles. Support for Latke, support for circles, misconceptions, less alignment with the standards. I ask you, do these math majors with their paper plate Latke models look like they're aligning with the standards? Support for Hamantaschen, support for triangles, and actual circles. Better alignment with the Common Core state standards and the standards for mathematical practice. And these math majors, they're aligned with the Common Core state standards. Clearly, to me, Hamantaschen embrace the tetrahedral frustum. And one last one, because I am a member of the National Academy of Needle Arts, I need to show you that we make tetrahedral frusta for our Ort boxes. So here you go. It's embrace them all. Folded, stitched, cooked.
Austan Goolsbee is one of our most distinguished professors. He has appeared on the Jon Stewart, the Colbert Report, and Sean Hannity shows. He has been declared the funniest celebrity in Washington when he was a celebrity in Washington, and I'd be willing to still grant him that distinction. Jon Stewart described Mr. Goolsbee as Eliot Ness meets Milton Friedman, but Salon.com named him to its list of the 15 sexiest men of 2010. I am not sure these two distinctions are compatible with each other. Could it be the Salon distinction says something about Salon? Goolsbee's academic research focuses on the internet, the new economy, government policy, and taxes. At this time, he is in favor of all of these. That's what I heard from Sean Hannity. His position as the Robert P. Gwinn Professor of Economics in the Booth School of Business is predicated on the conclusion of his colleagues that, in fact, he was just kidding about all that. Goolsbee has said, "I don't mind playing smash-mouth football. I'm not afraid to take a punch." Let's see what he says after this debate.
Okay. I want to make one thing clear, and that is that this debate ends tonight. When I first spoke at this debate, I spoke to Ted and I said, I don't know if I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. And he told me about his first debate. And he said he felt totally unprepared. And then he realized that there was not, according to him, any single fact that could be used in the debate. It was completely abstract with no way to prove a point one way or the other, so it was perfectly in the realm of the philosophy department and he was completely prepared. Now, I have taken the totally opposite approach of what Ted advised, and that is I'm going to speak only about data, fact, and empirical observation. That's the kind of economist that I am. I am sorry to subject you to the economics of this debate, but I believe that when it is done, the charade will be over. The Hamantash people have constructed a wall of obfuscation and ridiculousness, and we will tear down that wall. I'm very slowly changing the page. How do we?
Let's try that.
Okay. I will make 4 economic arguments that there is more demand for latkes. The supply is better. They grow more, and the macroeconomics of Hamantash are ridiculous. First, economists have not very many tools. We use the tools we have on everything. One of them we have is called revealed preference, which means we don't care what you say, we look at what you do, and that reveals what your preferences are. So let us think about demand. I went to the Google Suggest labs. Google Suggest are the people that create, when you go into the Google toolbar and you start to type something, it suggests other things that people would have there. So if you type in University of Chicago, Google Suggest will say, essentially, did you mean University of Illinois at Chicago? They will put that. It will say, University of Chicago Hospital comes up. Until recently, it used to say, University of Chicago Fun Goes to Die. If you type in latke, there is a lot of confusion about whether this is a plural or a singular. You got 590,000 sites where they're referring to latkes, latkes recipes, latkes recipe, is it singular, is it plural? There's latke Larry. There's the latke that couldn't stop screaming, got 122,000 websites. Now it turns out that's a children's book. The latke who couldn't stop screaming, A Christmas Story, and it's number 42,000 on Amazon. You can order it in paperback or hardback. Just the leading ones, there are more than 2 million websites that are citing these. When I looked up Hamantashen, they got the same singular plural problems, but it had on top of it a bunch of spelling issues. Is that a recipe? I looked up Hamantash Harry, nothing. And you know what else is something nobody ever said or looked up or cited? Boy, do I love prunes. Nothing. There are less, 1/6 as many sites. The demand is very low. Second, I looked up Latke-licious, which was one of the things. It turns out Pluto's gone, but there's an entire Latke planet I was not familiar with. Latke-licious itself is a song. It was voted the #1 Hanukkah song of 2006. It was actually shown, there's a video, and that video was shown on VH1. I went to Hamantash-licious. Google could not find Hamantash-licious. But this, I love everything about this. It's kind of small, so you might not be able to read it. It says, sorry we couldn't find Hamantash-licious. Here are some related websites. Grizzly bear videos. Grizzly bear videos, why? Because evidently there's something called bearlicious, and it just thought you were a really, really bad speller. And over here on the right, under related searches, you've got Bearlicious, Bear Bryant, Bear Mace, and Bear Stearns. So not only is the demand low, you Hamantash people caused the financial crisis. The second part of demand that I would like to raise is that of my friend and former graduate school buddy, Steve Levitt, the author of Freakonomics. And in Freakonomics, there is a chapter, if you read it, that is about the demand for names and how certain names start as rich people's names, and then the demand for poor people, they start using those names, and it's the evolution of these names. When he was doing the research for that chapter, he came to me and he said, I can tell with 100% certainty that you are from a white trash family. And I said, what are you basing that on? He said, well, naming a child after a southern city is a 99% indicator on its own. Misspelling your child's name is also a 99% indicator. But if you named them after a southern city and you misspelled it, it's a guarantee. My mom's flight was delayed. If she was here, I could hear her muttering under her breath, you were not named after a southern city. You were named after Stephen F. Austin, the father of Texas. The city is named after him. And your father's the one who changed the spelling. That tells you his family is a white trash family, not ours. But so I said, all right, from his work on the demand for names, what do we know if we go to an online grocery store? What is the demand for names of things that could remotely be considered latkes? We've got Manischewitz, a series of potato pancake mixes. We got Liebers, we got Streitz, we got Carmel. Hell, even Hungry Jack is making a latke now. And if you don't think that's a latke, then explain how these Hungry Jack pancakes are ordained kosher by the Organic Union of Synagogues and whatever the D one is that I can't remember. There's tons of demand for these. I said, well, what demand is there for Hamantaschen? And the best I could come up with is a Fig Newton. But then as I thought about it, that's not even right. Okay, there's fig, apple, there's strawberry Newtons, cherry Newtons, mini Newtons, non-fat Newtons. There's a cherry and cheesecake Newton. There are no prune Newtons. There are no poppy seed Newtons. And it's not even a triangle. So a Fig Newton, there is no demand for anything in the grocery store that even resembles a Hamantaschen. And a Fig Newton is not such a thing. So in my opinion, demand is far higher for latkes because they're superior. Now let's think about supply. Okay. Potato supply. Turns out there are more than 325 million tons of potatoes produced in 2014. More than 120 nations grow the potatoes. There is a World Potato Congress that meets and rotates around the world. In 2008 was in Paris, France. In 2012, Edinburgh, Scotland. I'm not making this up, the United Nations, in 2008, they declared it the International Year of the Potato. And if you are a historian, you know that the Irish potato famine suggests that the failure of potatoes leads to immediate famine. Okay, so I said, let's consider the supply of prunes. Production is 0.3 million tons. The International Prune Congress does exist. They say that more than 7 countries make prunes, and they have declared the prune capital of the world is Yuba City. Yuba City, for 15 years, had the International Prune Festival. It was attended by a small number of people. In 2001, they changed the name of the International Prune Festival to the International Dried Plum Festival. And in 2003, it was canceled because, according to them, costs of production rose and there was competition from many other festivals. They instead converted to the International Prune Congress, which was in Davis, California. As far as me or all of my research assistants, we could never find a single thing the United Nations ever said about prunes. And we all know that what happens when there's a failure of the prune crop. Okay, so now, some people are going to say, well, but it doesn't have to be prunes. What about poppies? Fine. There were 1 million tons of poppy production. We have spent billions worldwide and in Afghanistan to stop it. And the United Nations Organization for Drug Control has made a statement about poppies, and that is $50 to $70 million per year from poppy production goes to the Taliban. So I hope you Hamantash people are happy. If you vote for Hamantash, the terrorists have won. Third, we know from economics that anything that affects the growth rate in the long run is more important than anything else. And we don't have lab experiments really in economics. We're trying to develop them, so we have mostly used what we call natural experiments. So you want to know what's the effect of an extra year of school on your wages? They go and find people who are born just before or just after the mandatory education cutoff, because it's more likely that they will have an extra year of school. Things like that. So so if we want to think about the natural experiment of Hamantash and Latke's, we have to think a little bit about history. And there's a disputed, sordid history of those two things. The Hamantash date to Haman, but not really in the form as we eat them today. The Hamantash, is it a triangle because that was the shape of Haman's ear? Is that the shin in Hamantash shin means pocket? So is it referring to his pocket that he used to pay people to try to turn over the Jews? It was his hat, a triangle. All of those have been alleged, but the Hamantashen that we know today, folks believe was created somewhere between 500 and 700 of the Common Era. Latke's date much later. The potato was not even introduced to Europe until the mid-1500s from the New World, and people believe that the latke comes about from the mid to late 1700s when, in the midst of a famine, Catherine the Great required the poorer states of what is now Eastern Europe and parts of Russia to grow potatoes because they grew more rapidly, they were more resistant to disease, and one of those areas was the Pale of Settlement. That is where latkes came from. Now, so the natural experiment is as follows. This is 2,000 years of European per capita income. You can see that the growth effect of Hamantash is what I would describe as bupkis. And Latke is not only preventing the famine and destruction of widespread parts of Jewish Eastern Europe also may have created the Industrial Revolution. And if you add up the $17,000 per person suggested in per capita income addition from latkes, that's more than $7 trillion of value in excess of what Hamantash is worth, which is nothing. So there is a great deal of discussion in economics today about inequality, and I will remind you of the line from the Talmud, which is translated loosely as spread the sour cream, spread the wealth, and that is how we get some advantage. My final point is about macroeconomics. Because we are the former home of Milton Friedman, we would be remiss not to discuss it. I would like to talk for a moment about Hamantash inflation. The recipe for Hamantash says bake for 30 minutes and let rest. My estimation is that those cookies inflate approximately 4% over that time. If the inflation continues at that rate, I will merely point out that that is a daily inflation rate of 156.3% per day. If that inflation rate continues, that is an annual inflation rate of 1.62 times 10 to the 151st%. Now, some comparisons. The Kovler Cafe salad bar has had only 155% inflation. Argentina in 1989, 20,266% inflation. The highest inflation that economists have ever measured was in Weimar, Germany in 1923, times 10 to the 72nd percentage. And that did not end well. So I am telling you, Hamantash people, if you allow this kind of thing to occur, our Nobel laureate and Latke-Hamantash debater Milton Friedman himself will be turning over in his grave. Finally, I would like to talk a bit about unemployment, the other of the twin towers of macroeconomics. We have had a great deal of unemployment in recent years and a dramatic drop in the labor force participation rate. And yet 84% of employers are estimated to require pre-employment drug testing. I found an actual paper in Forensic Science International called Opiate Concentrations Following the Ingestion of Poppy Seed Products, Evidence for the Poppy Seed Defense, which indicates that eating one slice of poppy seed cake can raise the poppy seed opiate concentration in the blood to 302 grams, I don't know if that's a nanograms per milliliter, which is in excess of the drug testing threshold standard. And there is a case of an exemplary St. Louis police officer in the 1990s who had 4 poppy seed bagels for lunch, which, first of all, who eats 4 poppy seed bagels for lunch? What, a sesame bagel is chopped liver? Come on. He ate 4 poppy seed bagels and within 30 minutes took his drug test and was fired from the St. Louis police force. If you want more unemployed on your watch, then by all means, vote for the Hamantash. But the misery index is inflation plus unemployment, and so I believe that the macroeconomics has proven that the Hamantash are miserable. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we must all be passed in judgment, and every food must pass judgment. And I put up a picture of another one of our Nobel laureates in economics, George Stigler, and a 1976 Latke-Hamantash debater, because I believe that he put us in the right mindset for grading the Hamantash after these years. A student came in. George Stigler was known as a tough grader. A student came into his office and said, "Professor Stigler, I'm very upset with how I did in your class, and I would like you to look at my exam and see if you can change my grade." He looked at his test and he handed it back and he said, "No, I'm afraid F is the lowest grade I am able to give. I met a wonderful Jewish girl from New Jersey 17 years ago. And I made a religious promise, a mitzvah, if you will, that I would carry out, that if she could go to Abilene, Texas, and win the annual chili cook-off contest, then I would damn sure defend my mother-in-law's latkes against some collection of half-baked prunes, and I ask you to do the same.
Once Malynne Sternstein got here, she never left. She received her BA, MA, and PhD from here at a time when that was technically speaking legal, and has repeatedly refused to leave. However, one should not jump to the conclusion that she actually likes it here. She studied Slavic literature, leaving her even more depressed than she had ever been before. It was at that time that she stopped wearing lilac. Her current research interest and extracurricular obsession is horror film. She struggles with the concept of Dharma when teaching the Mahabharata and form when teaching Gombrowicz, and then shamelessly conveys this confusion to her students who suspect her of shamelessness and confusion. She treats them as though they are out to get her. And who's to say they're not? And it's not paranoia if it's true. She is Jewish on her wrong side, and so she compensates by practicing an idiosyncratic form of Buddhism called self-pity. Under these circumstances, I need to ask Austan how the doctrine of revealed preference applies in this case. Does she want to be here? I submit to you, dear audience, ponder as you listen to Ms. Sternstein, whether she prefers the food that she supports or supports the food she would rather support than eat.
So I have a great story about Ted Cohen. As you know, I was here as an undergraduate, as a graduate student, and then they hired me. So it was my sophomore year in college, and I had a boyfriend who was a graduate student. Big deal. He was a philosophy graduate student. And he took a course with Ted called Aesthetics. And he came home one day and he said to me, Perry DeLay, he said to me, Malynne, you know what Ted Cohen said in class today? I'm like, what? Ted Cohen, what did he say? He said, I like Jews. Malynne, I think I should drop this class. So I'd like to start off by saying that I am extremely, indeed painfully honored to be part of the Latke-Hamantash debate this year, and especially humbled to be reprising the 2011 coup witnessed by the inestimable university treasure, Professor Ted Cohen. My first maneuver has to be, of course, to ask, is there really a debate to be had here? Is there competition between vodka and the Hamantash? Really? Okay, sure, Purim has its groggers, but vodka is, well, vodka. I do understand then, though, why I, as a Slavicist, was invited to discuss the relative merits of vodka and Hamantash and to come to a decision. After all, vodka, sweet little water, is of Slavic extraction. East European Jews, as I know from personal experience, are deeply attracted to vodka. What may be less well known is vodka's intimate affinity with the Jewish faith itself. The time-honored method to the debate on vodka and Hamantaschen has, of course, been to extract wisdom from eminent scholars in their respective fields. That time-honored tradition seems to end with me, though. Which wisdom, based on the eminence of the scholar and the vast matter of their fields, could help decide once and for all on the superiority of vodka or Hamantash. It is arguable how expert I am in my field of Slavic studies, and also how much I can separate my life in academia from my private life. After all, do I really have a private life? But I must stray slightly from the path taken by so many before me, because when all is said and done, looking over my life and my academic responsibilities, I cannot help but take this debate very personally. Hamantaschen have traumatized me. I have, for the purposes of coping with life, purged most of the images of myself with Hamantaschen from my library, my PowerPoint slides, but I did find one. I myself will look away, but I wish you courage. So what, you may say? So it's affected you, but what does that mean for me? How is the Hamantash, that precious and delectable cookie filled with cooked fruit or poppy seeds, or in recent times with that most wonderful of foods, Nutella, harmed any other creature, indeed been even remotely responsible for causing pain? So I got to thinking, as instrumental as the Hamantash has been in the troubles in my life and throughout history, could there not be a Hamantash at the root of other disasters, perhaps a little further from home? At 7:17 a.m. on the morning of June 30th, 1908, a mysterious explosion occurred in the skies over Siberia. It was caused by the impact and breakup of a large meteorite at an altitude roughly 6 kilometers in the atmosphere. Now, at first glance, it would seem that the meteor would implicate vodka. After all, meteors are, as has been proven, giant potatoes. But upon closer inspection, the truth cannot be denied. As a Slavicist, I took a shot of vodka and wondered aloud, what other havoc has the Hamantash wreaked upon beloved Mother Russia? Let's begin with Ivan, who was terrible. The painting is by the wondrous artist Ryepin, who painted the scene of Ivan holding the son he had just murdered in his arms. But what's that Ryepin so wisely understood about the ghost that haunted this hideous event? A detail of the painting shows us what we have already predicted. Now let's calm down a bit and look to what we do know about the Hamantash and evil. Here, the awful Haman is rendered in some ways palatable by being a character for children to color in this Purim-themed coloring book. But let us not be tempted to infantilize him. As we all know, Haman was a particularly bad guy. Now let's take a look at that Ivan the Terrible again. Skipping centuries, but clinging on to pain, as is the Russian way. The image of Rasputin cannot escape our sights. How did Rasputin get away with all that he did? Count Stolypin, Tsar Nicholas's loyal prime minister, whose records revealed that he had had an argument with Rasputin, also revealed that he, quote, was stooped and intimidated by the hypnotic stare of Rasputin's piercing eyes. Stolypin and many other political figures of that time had documented that Rasputin, quote, was possessed of a powerful and hypnotic glare that he used to intimidate and cow his enemies. Even then, the Russian taste for vodka was no weapon against these eyes. From whence did those eyes derive their unworldly allure? Well, this is getting all too obvious, almost a one-trick pony of a joke, in fact. But what, you might ask, and rightly so, do the great writers of the Russian canon have to say about the Hamantash? Surely Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, known by disenfranchised Russianists as the complex Tolstoyevsky, What do they have to say about the Hamantash? Surely they have weighed in. Indeed, they have. Dostoevsky is famed for saying, repeatedly, much unhappiness has come into the world because of Hamantashen, and things left unsaid. And who can forget Dostoevsky's chilling words from his masterpiece, The Brothers Karamazov? The awful thing is that the Hamantashen are mysterious as well as terrible. God and the devil are fighting there, and the battlefield is the heart of man. And Tolstoy on the Hamantash? Late in his life, Tolstoy harbored a deep suspicion of the cookie, and, might we add, tarts in general, that so few have taken to heart, especially at Purim, perhaps because they do not know how to read the late Tolstoy, or perhaps because they do not know how to read. But who's to say who should teach us how to read? We, the peasants, or the peasants, us? In Tolstoy's words, a man can live and be healthy without eating Hamantashen for food. Therefore, if he eats Hamantashen, he participates in taking life merely for the sake of his appetite. In 1898, he wrote these unforgettable words: Korень всего зла, Хаменташих, свился к познанию истинного учения. От этого и нищета, и разврат, и ненависть, и казни, и убийства. Сначала это кажется странным, но когда вдумаешься, то видишь, что это так и не может быть иначе. And in Russia's more recent history, how can we deny the truth that L. Lisitsky, in his ostensibly leftist poster art, confers to us? Beat the whites with the red wedge, yells Lisitsky, but maybe we've shown too much. It goes without saying that the Hamantash can be a nuisance, and most of you, I am sure, would leave it at that. But what if this were a strategy on their part, to inure us to the belief that that is all they are, just a nuisance? I challenge you, to whom have these events not happened? The Hamantash has gotten underfoot, of course, and left a minor mess on our best, most beloved footwear, caused us unnecessary wardrobe changes. And how long have we all waited on AAA to save us from this? But is the Hamantash really so benign? Cute, even if in its small invasions into our everyday lives? Or has the Hamantash, in taking up this position in our lives, done something much more perfidious? Is it possible that the greatest trick the Hamantash ever played is to convince us that it no longer exists? Or, in other words, and in the words of another, the Hamantash is never that which conceals the truth. It is the truth which conceals that there is none. Of course, I quote from the wonderful Jean Baudrillard, who concludes his essay on the Hamantash with a cautiously optimistic note. This is ultimately why power is so in accord with ideological discourses and discourses on ideology. For these are all discourses of truth, always good, even and especially if they are revolutionary, to counter the mortal blows of Hamantashen. But can we be as sanguine as Baudrillard? He did die, after all. We might also have recourse to the wise words of Paul Fussell on the idea of the Hamantash. In short, Hamantashen, he's not short about this at all, I warn you. In short, Hamantashen have gotten such a head start that nothing can slow them down much, even if we should blow up the teachers' colleges, nationalize the airlines, make C not B the average grade again, reinstall Latin in high schools, stop demeaning the children by calling them kids, and policemen by calling them cops, get rid of intercollegiate athletics, curb the national impulse to brag, raise the capital gains tax, teach a generation to sneer at advertising and to treat astrology with contempt, build bridges that don't collapse, stay out of space, persuade educated people that criticism is their main business, speak and write English and other languages with some taste and subtlety, get the homeless into a new civilian conservation corps, produce intelligent movies, develop in the Navy higher standards of courage and discipline, start a few sophisticated national newspapers, give diners at restaurants the guts to say, after the manager has asked them if they've enjoyed their dinner, no. Abandon all remains of the self-congratulatory Cold War psychosis, improve the literacy of public signs and the taste of public sculpture, get people of artistic talent to design our stamps and money, and develop public television into a medium free of all commerce. Because these things are not likely to happen, the only recourse is to laugh at Hamantaschen. If you don't, you're going to have to cry. I mean, this was given in 2011. I know he doesn't look this way. Which brings us to what else but ideology again. And that rascally Slavoj Žižek, the Elvis of critical theory. As Žižek says, quoting from his intellectual father, Jacques Lacan, quoting from Karl Marx, the most elementary definition of ideology is probably the well-known phrase, Sie wissen das nicht, aber sie essen es. They do not know it, but they are eating it. Are all Slavists aware of the evils of Hamantaschen, you might be wondering? Or is this just your fight, Sternstein? Žižek's brilliant medium, Caitlin Tucker, graduate student in Slavic and thinker of infinities, has this to say. Hamantaschen, a confection which sugarcoats the illusion of absolute access to desire, jam, thus reflects a postmodern over-proximity to the desire, jam. When in the process of eating a Hamantash, one reaches the jam, absent center, our desire fades, as our desire for that jam was constituted by the very fact of our barred access to that jam, which is no longer barred. Hamantaschen, in short, rob us of the transgressive dimension of our desire. Cheryl Stevenson, another Slavicist, also a graduate student in Slavic, which is to prove that students of Slavic have spent a good deal of time and energy on the so-called Hamantash question, or Vapros Hamantashich, has said this: there's something odd about prunes. How they hide their true identity as dried plums behind a mask that everyone associates with constipation. And with all the violence in Afghanistan and elsewhere associated with the poppy industry, how can the Hamantash remain unvilified? It means more for me saying it because I'm a humanist. Hamantaschen also tend to resemble biology textbook diagrams of the uterus. And it seems a little messed up to eat a pastry shaped like a uterus. So true, Cheryl. So true. Joan Didion has astutely observed, a Kincaid painting is typically rendered in slightly surreal pastels. It typically features a cottage or a house of such instant coziness as to seem actually sinister, suggestive of a trap designed to attract Hansel and Gretel. Every window is lit to lurid effect as if the interior of the structure might be on fire. I admire Didion's conclusions, but what if the lurid effect could be caused most of all by Kincaid's disturbed and obsessive inclusion of the Hamantash? So what have I just done to you? Perhaps what the Hamantash has done to us all. So just like Socrates in the Phaedrus, in his speech on love, I'm omitting a position case in favor of vodka. The cosmopolitan. Vodka tonic. The vodka soda. A Jell-O shot. Sex on the beach. Vodka martini. The Cape Cod. The screwdriver. the White Russian, the hipster Moscow Mule. And because vodka is often made from potatoes, you could conceivably even make a delicious, scrumptious, spirit-enlivening, being-leavening latke out of vodka. What you can't make is a hamantash.
A lot of good stuff has been said about Wendy Doniger. She has taught at Harvard, Oxford, the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, UC Berkeley, and at the University of Chicago, where she is at present the Mircea Eliade Distinguished Service Professor of the History of Religion. In short, she has had a hard time keeping down a job. She has more doctorates than an 8-fingered man has fingers. Two of these were earned, but the others were bestowed on Professor Doniger by people who were afraid about what she would write about them. Rather than discuss her achievements, which are many, I would like to quote some of her critics, whose number has as many zeros as she has doctorates. They say, "Shame, shame, shame on you." I went to Amazon to see how many books she has written, and 464 results came up. This is not as it seems. The book, Mythologies with Bonnefoy, is actually 2 volumes, but only counted as 1 result. Rumor has it that she is currently working on a new book called Smut of the Gods, scheduled to be banned sometime next year. In all of Asia and Antarctica for shocking revelations regarding the penguin and the seal. I am frightened to hear what Ms. Doniger will reveal to us tonight about the latke and the hamantash.
I don't have a PowerPoint because I am recapitulating the talk I gave before PowerPoint was invented, before computers were invented, before writing was invented, long, long time ago. I was also asked to shorten the original presentation, and I shortened it. I also cleaned it up a little bit. When I gave it the first time, Ted Cohen, who also made a presentation, thanked me after I gave my talk, and he said, "I want to thank Wendy for her talk because before I heard hers, I thought that mine might be in bad taste." So this is the archetypal hamantash, which is a feminist mythology, also drawing upon linguistics and the history of religions. In prehistoric times, all societies were matriarchies, of course, and worshipped the feminine in the form of a hamantash. But when the Indo-European male chauvinist pigs, unclean goyim, destroyed the civilization in which the goddess reigned, they replaced her with their male gods, and they replaced her sacred hamantaschen with their profane latkes. I will argue that the religions of the ancient Near East and the religions of India had a single ancestor, a hamantaschen goddess-worshipping primitive tribe, of which the traces have been carefully trampled out in Judaism, but still survive in Hinduism. More specifically, I will demonstrate beyond any shadow of a doubt that the womb-like pastry was the symbol of the female's androgynous ability to procreate unilaterally, and that it was replaced by the profane phallic potato, which was, particularly when cooked with egg pancakes, the symbol of the male's womb envy and misogyny. When we feed this insight back into the tale of Esther, we realize that Haman didn't envy Mordecai, the mentor of Esther, as the extant text lamely but repeatedly insists, but rather in the original lost version, the reconstructed Ur text, Haman envied Esther, envied her ability to procreate. The present form of the potato latke gives no clue to its original sexual symbolism. But fortunately, we can reconstruct the hypothetical archetypal latke, which was indubitably male. It was a potato pancake, but one formed more like a crepe, and it was rolled like the crepe into a long phallic tube filled with smetan, sour cream, or butter. I'm telling you, I cleaned it up. Both common ritual symbols of semen. Thus, the form of the latke was once male. Its content is still male, for although the gender of the potato may seem irrelevant or at least indeterminable, the other basic ingredient in the latke is positively macho, eggs, a well-known slang term for testicles in most Indo-European languages. Yaitsi in Russian, including, of course, Yiddish, ayar. The Indian latke, called the chapati, often made with potatoes, is the symbol of royalty and male dominance. This is clear from a tale told about the Emperor Chandragupta Maurya in the 3rd century BC. This is actually a real story. While debating within himself about how to conquer India, he saw an Indian mother telling her child to eat his chapati from the outside, where it would cool faster. She said, in Sanskrit, adaswa adaswa tata, which is the exact Sanskrit equivalent of SS Tatala. From his observation of the mother, who was significantly harassing her son to make him eat, the great Emperor Chandragupta conceived the idea of beginning his campaign by harassing the outlying provinces rather than staging a palace coup at the center. So much for the macho latke. On the other hand, the Indian bread that corresponds to the hamantash, in contrast with the chapati, is a puffed, pastry-like bread that can be stuffed and is called the puri. Now, the word puri is obviously a variant of the word Purim, the feast of the Hamantaschen, establishing finally and beyond any possible doubt the parallelism of the Sanskritic, Semitic, and Semiotic mythic traditions. The analysis of the Hamantash turns upon the sensitive issue of the relationship between form and content. In form, the Hamantash, as has been pointed out by several of my colleagues, is a womb, a container. In form, it is an archetypal symbol of the female. But the rich complexity of the Hamantash lies in the variety of its manifestational contents, sometimes poppy seed, sometimes with cherry, sometimes with prunes. The cherry is another symbol of the female, more specifically the female virgin. The poppy seed is both in form, as we've seen, seed being a metaphor for semen, and in name, poppy, father, male. The prune mediates between these two polarized opposite symbols. It is androgynous. When we have the prune in the pastry womb, we have the female androgyne, the woman with the power to create independent of any male, parthenogenetically. The prune Hamantash is thus the symbol of the archetypal androgynous goddess and must have been the original Purim Hamantash, the word prune being another variant of the word Purim, obviously. When the matriarchy was overthrown, the prune mother was split into two halves, male, poppy, and female, cherry. It is typical of the male dominance in Jewish culture that the poppy Hamantaschen by far outnumber the cherry Hamantaschen. There's a telling passage in English literature in which the prune and the potato appear together as symbols of the female and the male. This is a chapter from Dickens' Little Dorrit, in which a child addresses her father as father and is told to call him Papa instead. The woman who makes the correction goes on to remark, Papa, potatoes, poultry, prunes, and prism are all very good words for the lips, especially prunes and prism, end quote. Now, for the male papa and potatoes to be linked is, of course, inevitable. As for the other side, poultry symbolizes women, more precisely whores, poule in French. The final term prism is clearly a euphemism or a misprint or a scribal error or a late variant for priapism. Especially prunes and priapism is surely what Dickens meant to say, expressing the primeval coupling of the female and male principles. With this morphology in place, we can begin to investigate the history of the latke and the hamantash. Let's look first at the book of Genesis. This is not the occasion to review in detail the complex and still unresolved argument about the actual botanical identity of the fruit that Eve gave Adam to eat. One might point out in passing that the male chauvinist basis of Genesis is already revealed by the assumption that Eve, rather than Adam, will provide all the meals. Doubtless she rejoiced to find the fruit good for food, as she must have been driven to desperation by Adam's repeated complaints. What, figs for dinner again? The fruit, as we shall see, is the prune. The fact that later generations glossed the fruit as an apple is the result of a double Baudelarization by male commentators. When the prune cult was overthrown, the fruit in Eden was said to be a potato, symbol of the male. Now, the French for potato is pomme de terre, apple of the earth, earth being, of course, a symbol of the goddess. As the centuries went by, male or careless scribes left off the final phonic female phrase, and the fruit was said to be not a pomme de terre, but simply a pomme or apple. The fracas in Eden is repeated in a Mesopotamian story that resurfaces in the tale of Esther, the triumph of the archetypal earth goddess Ishtar, who becomes Esther, over the powers of evil Humam or Humbar, who becomes Haman. Again, the prune is not mentioned by name, probably because, like the name of God in the Hebrew text, it was too sacred to say out loud. But this need not trouble us. Esther seduces and kills Haman, as Eve seduced and undid Adam, and as all Jewish mothers seduce their consort sons by feeding them. The lighthearted phrase, help yourself to a piece of fruit, has deeply sinister implications that have been repressed for millennia. Esther invites Haman to a banquet and feeds him something that reduces him to putty in her hands. This event is commemorated at Purim by the eating of the archetypal hamantaschen, for Esther consumes Haman as we consume the hamantaschen, in an inverted, cannibalistic Eucharist expressing the devouring of the demonic enemy. In conclusion, the little three-cornered prune cakes preserve in their innocent folk wisdom the true meaning of the original myth. For though they are said unconvincingly to represent the hat of Haman, tash, as has been pointed out, does not mean hat, it means pocket. More precisely, it is a euphemism for the female sexual organ, as when a seductive woman is said to have a man in her pocket. Haman was... I really... Trust me, I really did clean it up, trust me. Haman was sacrificed both by and for Esther, the archetypal goddess who had Haman in her pocket. Thank you.
Aaron Dinner grew up in that shtetl near Chicago called Highland Park, which should not be confused with that shtetl near Princeton called Highland Park, a shtetl that is blessed with both a kosher Chinese restaurant and a kosher pizza shop. So, deprived by geography, Dinner went into exile. He was a wanderer. He wandered east. He suffered the indignity of Preparation H, that is, undergrad and grad training at Harvard. And then he wandered some more to Oxford, and then wandered west to Berkeley. Happily, the wandering did not end there, and Dinner is back. Since 2003, our fair university has been his home, where he is now the director of the James Franck Institute, and he works on the thermodynamics of living systems. Dinner's fundamental insight is that while a living system can go for quite a long time without food, after a while it gets quite kvetchy. Using spectrographic methods to measure quantitatively the relationship between duration, frequency, pitch, energy, and earnestness of the kvetch against mean inter-snack intervals, he showed that in Jewish bacteria, the kvetch precedes the meal and hence violates causality. He also showed that in Illinois, it is possible to violate the 3 laws of thermodynamics and get away with it. In fact, I heard rumors that he was once caught driving down Lakeshore Drive faster than the speed of light. Professor Dinner apparently believes that the laws of physics are good enough for other people, but for him, they are just suggestions. Professor Dinner's work has made him eminently qualified to be director of the James Franck Institute. I'm happy to introduce him as tonight's final debater.
Okay, so I was asked by the organizers to review my argument from a few years ago when I compared these 2 holiday foods with regard to their ability to address one of society's most pressing issues, a problem that chemistry will clearly play a central role in solving, and that is how we can achieve sustainable energy. We need only look to the holiday stories to appreciate the superiority of the latke in this regard. Try as you will, nowhere in the Purim story will you find any mention of fuel. By contrast, the Hanukkah story is all about the miracle of the oil and how a portion for one night lasted for 8. Indeed, as was already mentioned by Shmuel, the defining characteristic of the Hanukkah-associated foods is that they are fried in oil, a reference to the miracle. With this background, let's consider what makes a good fuel. It is high energy density by both volume and mass. Better substances are along the diagonal towards the upper right of this chart. The arrow indicates gasoline, an excellent fuel from this perspective. Let's put the foods on the chart. Nutrition facts for a Hamantash put it here, close to sugars, consistent with its ingredients. Reasonable numbers for olive oil are 35 megajoules per kilogram and a density somewhat less than water. That puts it here, close to fat and gasoline. However, oil associated with the miracle would be 8 times higher in energy density. That puts it here, off the chart. Now, in case you think that I've manipulated the numbers to my advantage, let me remind you that what separates the natural sciences from the humanities and the social sciences is that we can actually do experiments to test our hypotheses. And so I bring you 2 experiments. Stay here while I get my materials for the first one. In the first experiment, I consider the potential of these foods for making batteries. The basic unit of a battery is a galvanic cell in which one connects a metal that readily gives up electrons to another via an ionic medium, here a salt bridge. It's well known that a suitable ionic medium is a potato. You can see here that using as electrodes an ordinary copper penny and a galvanized, that is zinc-coated nail, I was able to obtain a potential of about 0.9 volts. Now, when I initiated this line of research, I reasoned that the ionic conductivity of a Hamantash would be low. Thus, I was surprised when, with a poppy seed-filled Hamantash, I was able to obtain a voltage about 2/3 that of a potato. I was initially skeptical of these results, but I convinced myself of them by extensively citing them in my subsequent articles. Indeed, I went on to measure other fillings. With prune, I obtained a voltage a little higher than a potato. Apricot, comparable, but with the now popular chocolate chip, or with some of the debaters, Nutella, negligible voltage, confirming my suspicion that this modern filling is not a legitimate one. To demonstrate my batteries, I'm going to light an LED, which converts electricity to light with near perfect efficiency. I have here 2 blue LEDs in honor of this year's Nobel Prize in Physics, which honored that color at the expense of all others. I'm going to do that live, and while I do that, I'm going to show you a now historic video that makes it a little bit easier to see what I'm doing. Today, we've assembled a potato battery and what I believe to be the first ever Hamantash battery. And we're going to use them to light these LEDs. First, we'll do the potato. So hopefully you can see that there. And now Hannah's going to help me do the Hamantash. Okay, which one do you think is brighter?
Hamantash.
Okay, so you can judge for yourselves. You heard my daughter argue for the Hamantash. What she doesn't appreciate, though, is that you have to account for the work to assemble the Hamantash because it's the net energy gain that's important. Moreover, as a chemist, I can tell you that there is a serious flaw with this experiment, and that is that it does not involve any explosions. And so I seek to rectify that with my second experiment. Now, what you see there is a potato cannon. The basic principle is the same as a cylinder in your car. A spark ignites a volatile gas, it expands, driving a plug outward. With the help of Dr. Mircea, laboratory director of general chemistry, I assembled the prototype you see there from PVC a few years ago. At that time, we tested it behind the Searle Chemistry Laboratory, and I showed a video in this forum. Today, with the benefit of 4 years' advances in ignition technology, together with help from my colleagues in the James Franck Institute, David Schuster and Greg Engel, as well as students, Ravim Ginsberg, Alex Snyder, and Jacob Dorn, today we can attempt a live firing. Okay, so I'm going to explain what we're doing in just a moment, but before I do that, let me just say, if the experiment works, it is like firing a cannon, and so the noise is going to be loud. So if you're uncomfortable with a loud noise, or you have a heart condition, then you should plan accordingly. I'll give you a little bit of warning. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to push a potato over the barrel to extract a plug. Then, maybe I can leave the stick. Let's get it mounted. we're going to use some butane for fuel. To the best of my knowledge, that doesn't violate any Jewish dietary law. Now, if the experiment works, and it really is a genuine experiment, what's going to happen is that the potato is going to shoot through that screen and be sliced into delectable fry-ready pieces. In case you're wondering how fast our potato was going, we can look to this genuine article, which was submitted to the archive last year. It was brought to my attention by Greg Engel, who is an expert not only in obscure quantum mechanical effects like the Lockheed-potato duality, but also firearms. He's also Ravim's advisor, might I add. You can see from the graph taken from the article that with butane, probably our potato was only moving at about 1/10 the speed of sound. If you really want it to go, you got to use acetylene. Not to be outdone by this study, I wanted to perform my own experiment for the Hamantash. The component of a Hamantash with materials properties most similar to a potato is the dough. However, I was concerned that the dough would stick in the barrel, causing an explosion that would terminate not just the experiment, but also the experimentalist. I thus searched for coefficients of friction for potatoes and dough. Our library, anticipating the introduction of engineering to this campus, had a subscription to the Journal of the American Society of Agricultural and Biological Engineers. And there I found a real article that reported on coefficients of friction for potatoes. However, I couldn't find analogous measurements for dough, despite a discussion of its properties in industrial mixers. Might I add that if you actually read that abstract, you'll see that the contacting surface matters. And so I had to make my own measurements for PVC. You can see that the angle of repose for the dough is quite a bit higher than for the potato. And so the sticking issue is a real one, and our only choice is instead to use an assembled Hamantash. So let's try that. You can see the cookie crumbles. This lack of durability is consistent with my earlier empirical experience with the Hamantash battery. Then the penny kept slipping out of the filling, limiting the lifetime. Now, since I'm actually a theorist, I wanted to end by deriving a relationship to help us understand our potato cannon observations. As I already mentioned, the basic idea is that a gas expands upon heating. Thus, it's natural to turn to the ideal gas law, which relates pressure and volume for a gas to moles and temperature via a fundamental constant, R. Now, those of you who have taken some chemistry know that the use of moles is just a unit choice, and so we can instead work in molecule numbers. In that case, we replace R with Boltzmann's constant K. Then, bringing the volume to the other side and substituting length times area, we essentially have our result. Let me highlight it for you. You see, contained within one of the most famous equations in all of science, the ideal P for potato, Latke, thus indicating the perfect nature of the Latke. With that, I want to thank my Canon helpers again, my family for their help in the experiments as well, and you for your attention.
I'd like to thank all of the debaters for their interesting contributions. I'd also like to thank all the people who made this debate possible, the various faculty members, contributors, campus and student life, a coalition of university Jewish organizations, AEPI, Chabad, Egalitarian Minyan, Hillel, JU, JewSA, Rhythm and Jews, and the UChicago Friends of Israel. Unfortunately, it seems to me that once again, we do not close the debate by closing the debate. Can it be that the human mind cannot plumb the depth of this mystery? I find this hard to believe. I can only hope that the contributions that were made bring us at least 1 year closer to the resolution of our dilemma than we were last year. But even that measure of progress I cannot be certain of. To conclude this depressing failure, I'd like to advocate that next year we, following MIT, Stanford, and Carnegie Mellon, eschew the power of thinking entirely and rely instead on the powerful tools of big data and machine learning. Surely, if we get a team of students feeding all of the known information into a well-designed learning algorithm, we can settle Latke versus Hamantash, as well as other debates like red versus blue, cake versus pie, scotch versus bourbon, and so on. If not, we'll at least get a new slate of debaters who might shed new insights into our problem and let the study continue. Thank you all for coming. Please enjoy sampling the repast at the reception.
And so, as we end, I'm going to ask you to please keep your seats for 1 more minute so that our debaters can recess and then come join us. Thank you.